Stop. Philosophy is a confession.
Okay, so Aaron talked about the evil of self-sacrifice. The title of my talk is The Virtue of Selfishness. And obviously I'm borrowing my title from the title of a book by Ayn Rand. She has a collection of essays on ethics or morality called The Virtue of Selfishness. Now, right away, if you think about the way we understand the idea of selfishness in our culture, this should strike you as very strange. Why would somebody write a book on morality and call it The Virtue of Selfishness, right? Everyone in our culture today knows, it's taken for granted, it's obvious, that selfishness is a vice, it's not a virtue, right? So why would you write a book called The Virtue of Selfishness? So if you think about the way we understand selfishness in our culture today, like what kinds of things come to mind? If you think about a selfish person, what kind of person do you think of? Just call it out. What kind of people do you think of when you think about a selfish person? Okay, well, not specific individuals, but just in general. And what kinds of characteristics do you? What kind of characteristics do you think of? Do you associate with selfishness? Criminals, okay. Liars, psychos, okay. But even on a more less extreme level, you know, just the people who are sort of thoughtless, right? People who just have no regard for other people, right? These are the kinds of people that we associate with the idea of selfishness, right? It's, you know, like it's the guy at the party who takes 4 slices of pizza before anybody else has even had one, right? That's the kind of thoughtless person we think of as a selfish person in our culture today, right? Or it's the guy on the freeway, you know, who's driving too fast, cutting people off, trying to get ahead, you know, putting everybody at risk just so we can get ahead a little bit faster, right? Or, you know, people mention criminals. I mean, the worst examples of this are people who prey on other people. They steal, you know, people talk about liars, cheaters, I mean, people who commit murder, right? You think of somebody like Al Capone, right? This is the mafia boss in Chicago in the 1920s who had a whole organized crime ring that was all about preying on other people in order to get what he wanted, right? So this is the way we understand the idea of selfishness in our culture today, right? It's these kinds of people. Now, Aaron did the show of hands thing, so who's read read either The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged. So for those of you who've read those novels, you see, if you think about a character like Howard Rourke in The Fountainhead or Dagny Taggart in Atlas Shrugged, right? These are people who are being portrayed as paragons of selfishness in these novels, right? They're portrayed as egoistic individuals in the stories. But do they have anything in common with, you know, Pizza Guy or Al Capone? I mean, when you think about Howard Rourke or Dagny Taggart, is this the kind of person that comes to mind? Obviously not at all if you've read these books, right? So what we're seeing here is that Ayn Rand has a radically different conception of what selfishness even means. She's taking a look at the conventional way that we understand the concept of selfishness and saying this is fundamentally mistaken. So, and she's sort of rethinking the idea of selfishness from the ground up. What is it that's mistaken about the conventional way that we understand the concept of selfishness in our culture? Well, if you look at a dictionary, you know, if you look up selfishness in the dictionary, what do you see? This is a pretty typical kind of definition, right? It's a concern for one's own welfare or advantage at the expense of or in disregard of others, right? I mean, if you've looked this up in the dictionary, this is a pretty typical kind of thing that you would see. notice that there are, so what Ayn Rand draws attention to with this kind of understanding of the idea of selfishness is, notice that there are two elements here to this definition, right? Selfishness means concern for your own interests, right? Without regard for or at the expense of others. So there's these two different parts to the definition, both of which are perceived as being essential to the definition. So the idea here is built into the very way that we think about selfishness, is the idea that in order to be concerned with your own interests, you have to have no regard for other people or be acting at the expense of other people, right? That what it means to be concerned about your own interests is to have no regard for or act at the expense of other people. So it's sort of like, this is what it means to be self-interested, is to so these two parts automatically go together, they necessarily go together. That to be self-interested, to be concerned with your own interests, means to prey on other people, to have no regard for other people, to be thoughtless, to be cruel, all these characteristics, right? And the idea is that what this implies is that in order for you to get ahead, you have to suffer, right? And in order for you to win, you have to lose. It's the idea that selfishness necessarily means that there's no such thing as a win-win relationship between people, that there's only win-lose relationships, right? For you to be concerned with your self-interest means that you've got to prey on or act at the expense of other people, right? But if you think about it, I mean, I think in our experiences, in our lives, we know that this is simply not true. It's simply not true that there's no such thing as a win-win relationship. We experience those all the time. If we go to work, you're presumably the company you work for benefits from the work that you do. That's why they hired you, and you benefit because you get paid. Presumably you like the work that you do. That's a win-win relationship, right? When you spend time with your friends, presumably you like hanging out with them, that's why they're your friends. So you benefit from being with them and they benefit from being with you. Where's the, exploitation of other people? Where's the disregard of other people in that, right? It's not there. It's a win-win relationship. Even something as simple as buying groceries. You get the groceries that you need and the store gets the money that you pay for them. Again, where's the acting at the expense of other people or in disregard of other people? So this conventional way that we think about the concept of selfishness, there's something that's fundamentally mistaken about it, okay? It's simply not true that to be concerned with your own interests necessarily means that you have to act without regard for other people or at the expense of other people. It's completely mistaken to think of it that way. And so, and yet, as we saw at the beginning, I mean, this is the way we think about selfishness. These are the kinds of people that we associate with the idea of selfishness. So the very concept that we have to think about what is in our self-interest or not in our self-interest is fundamentally mistaken and is problematic. So this is what Ayn Rand is identifying. Onkar mentioned in his talk that she's radical even at the level of thinking about how we use concepts and the way we use concepts to understand the world. So Ayn Rand had a name for the kinds of mistake that people are making when they use a concept like selfishness. And she called it a package deal. So the idea is, the term comes from the idea of, like if you book an all-inclusive vacation, right? You get the flight and the hotel and the food, it all comes together in one package. That's what a package deal is. Now, all-inclusive vacation is a good kind of package deal, but what Ayn Rand, in her writings and her philosophy, identified a whole bunch of conceptual package deals that are problematic. And they're problematic because what they do is they take two very different ideas that don't belong together and they treat them as though it's a single unit of thought. So this is what we're seeing with the idea of selfishness, the idea that to be concerned with your self-interest necessarily goes along with the idea of having no regard for others or acting at the expense of other people. So that's a package deal. It's taking these very different ideas and grouping them together as one thing. And so she was always on the lookout for these kinds of errors in our thinking and concepts that, you know, distort our thinking in this way. So one of the things that she tries to do is to break up this package deal. She wants us to reconceptualize the very idea of what it means to be selfish. It's simply not true from her perspective that to be concerned with your self-interest requires that you have no regard for other people or that you act at the expense of other people. She says that's a conceptual error. It's a package deal. We've got to cut it out of our thought and reconceptualize selfishness from the ground up. Okay, so if being concerned with your own self-interest does not require preying on other people, what does it require? You know, what does it mean to be concerned with your own self-interest? So let's take a step back here. Just have a pause on the slides for a second. What she wants us, oh, you can leave it up there. I wanted the blank slide. Okay. So we'll get to plants and animals in about 2 seconds here. So she wants us to rethink morality from the ground up. Okay, selfishness is a moral concept, right? It's a concept that pertains to what's good and what's bad. You know, how we should think about how we live our lives. So where does the whole realm of morality come from, right? If we want to rethink morality from the ground up, we've got to ask what gives rise to the need for morality in the first place. So the way Ayn Rand begins this thought process, she says, you know, what is the basic fact of reality that gives rise to morality? And it's the fact that living organisms face the alternative of life and death. Okay, if you're plants or animals, if they don't get the values that they need to survive, they'll die. And it's this basic alternative that gives rise to the very need for morality. Now, it gives rise to the very need for values. So living organisms pursue values, and you know, they need those values in order to survive and flourish. Now, for plants and animals, you know, they're shaped by evolution in order to do this sort of thing automatically. So there's my plant. So, you know, a plant is going to grow its roots down into the soil to get water and nutrients. It's going to put up its leaves to get carbon dioxide from the atmosphere so it can do photosynthesis and that sort of thing, right? Animals, you know, are shaped by evolution to have all kinds of behaviors that they pursue in order to, you know, get food and water, to keep themselves safe from predators, etc., right? Now, human beings, though, we don't automatically get all the values that we need to survive, right? As a result of our evolution, what do we have that plants and animals don't have that makes a difference in terms of how we go about pursuing our values? What do we have? What did evolution give us that it didn't give the lower animals? Thumbs. Aaron says thumbs. Free will. Yeah. I mean, basically, it gave us this big brain, right? The basic way that human beings have to pursue the basic means that we have to pursue the values that we need to survive is by thinking, by using our minds, right? We don't automatically know how to find fresh water, right? How to hunt down animals, you know, in order to be able to eat them, how to build shelters, right? We have to figure all these things out. We don't have built-in behaviors that allow us to do these things automatically. And if that's true at the level of sort of a primitive hunter-gatherer kind of existence, you know, just think about how much more true that is in our complex industrial division of labor society, right? again, coming back to the novels, if you think about Dagny Taggart, so she's the operating vice president of a transcontinental railroad. Just think about all of the questions that she has to answer on a daily basis to keep this whole system running, the problems that she has to solve, right? She's got, you know, thousands of employees operating hundreds of trains, serving thousands of customers, shipping freight all across the country in order to provide this value of transportation, right? You know, so just think about all of the hard thinking that she has to do in order to make this happen, all of the decisions that she has to make. Now, again, this doesn't happen automatically. And the other thing is that it's really hard work. It takes a lot of effort. And we face all kinds of resistance and temptations not to want to put in that effort. Also in Atlas Shrugged, where, you know, Dagny is contrasted with another character who you might be familiar with if you've read the book, her brother James Taggart, who's the president of the railroad. And he's the perfect example of somebody who absolutely does everything he can to avoid doing the hard thinking and the hard work required to, you know, achieve this value of transportation. He doesn't want to face reality. He doesn't want to face the facts. The very first words out of his mouth in the book are, "Don't bother me, don't bother me, don't bother me," right? So what we see here is that the hard work that Dagny does in order to solve all these problems, answer these questions, the hard thinking that she has to do, it's not automatic, and it's actually a real achievement. She has to choose to commit, you know, her energy and her effort to doing that work. It doesn't just happen. And there's all kinds of examples in the world of people who don't want to do that and who choose not to do that. So it's really important to understand the fact that it's a choice. Or think about, we also talked about Howard Roark in The Fountainhead, right? Think about the kind of thinking that he has to do in order to, you know, design a beautiful structure that serves the function that it's intended for. So he's got to think about all the things that he has to integrate: the site, the materials, you know, the purpose and the function of the building, the specifications. He's got to take all of this, and now for Howard Roark, what he wants to do is design a building, you know, that is an expression of his creative genius, that you know, doesn't just follow the traditions of the past. So he's got to do all this work to conceive of the design, you know, and then there's all the work that goes into coordinating all the labor to construct the building in order to get the finished product, right? Now, he's contrasted in The Fountainhead with people who don't want to exercise the independence to come up with their own creativity and their own designs. The whole rest of the profession that he's fighting against in the novel are people who just want to copy the designs of the past, right? And who want to follow architectural authorities. So this is another temptation that we can fall into, of, you know, exercising reason to a point, but not doing it in a way that's independent. So, yeah. So the upshot of all this is the basic means of human survival is reason. But reason doesn't function automatically. And we face all kinds of temptations, and there's all kinds of opportunities to resist having to put in the hard work that reason demands. So the implication of all of this is that in order to act in your own self-interest, what it truly means to be selfish is to be committed to practicing the virtue of rationality. That's the essential, fundamental principle of the objectivist ethics, really, is that what it truly means to be selfish is to use reason as a matter of conscious, deliberate commitment 100% of the time. You know, treat it as an absolute and as a matter of principle. Okay, so being concerned with your self-interest does not mean going around preying on other people. It means living a life of reason and choosing to do that as an act of principle. Now, what that looks like, so she cashes this out into a whole set of other virtues, some of which we sort of hinted at here, right? And Ankar talked about some of these, Aaron talked about some of these. So, you know, what it means to live a life of rationality is to choose to be committed to rationality, is to choose to exercise the virtue of independence, integrity, justice, honesty, pride. Ankar talked about pride, productiveness, right? Now, Ayn Rand has a lot to say about each of these virtues and what it means to embrace these as virtues and to commit to, you know, practicing these virtues as a matter of principle. And if you dig further into her writings and into the objectivist literature, there's a lot that you can learn about how to properly pursue your own self-interest by practicing these virtues. But I wanted to put this list of virtues up here just to come back to the beginning of my talk, and again, to think about, when you think about these kinds of qualities, you know, if a person exhibits these kinds of characteristics, you know, is this the kind of person that you think of, you know, that you would associate with Pizza Guy or Al Capone, right? And I think what this highlights and underscores is just how radical Ayn Rand's reconceptualization of morality is. So this idea that we have in our culture of what selfishness means, it's, you know, Ankar likes to use the phrase 100% wrong. And so I think that's applicable here too. It's 100% wrong. We have to rethink it from the ground up. And I wanted to bring in this point about package deals because the concepts that we use, concepts are our tools of thought, right? We use concepts in order to think about our lives, think about the world, make decisions, and act in the world. And if our concepts are completely mistaken and broken, that's going to impede our ability to think clearly about what we want out of life and how to act and how to make the choices that we need to make in our life. And so you can think about it this way. If you're trying to build a piece of furniture and all you have are a bunch of broken tools, you're not going to get very far, right? It's going to hamper your ability to build the furniture you're trying to build. So what Ayn Rand points out with regard to concepts is that if our concepts are broken, think about how hard it is to build a life if the conceptual tools that you have are broken. Now, this is why it's so critical to get our concepts right. And in particular, you know, the concept of selfishness is such a fundamental concept in terms of thinking about, you know, what we want out of life. It's really important to get that concept right and to be clear on what it means. Okay, so let me just wrap up and summarize my takeaways here. So the first point is it's not true that selfishness requires, you know, acting at the expense of other people or preying on other people, these things that we think of in our conventional understanding of the concept. Our conventional understanding is a package deal that distorts our ability to think clearly about morality. And what true selfishness requires is a commitment to rationality and all these other demanding virtues.
If you guys made it this far, I appreciate it. Please remember to like and subscribe if this is the type of content you like, motivational type, inspirational stuff. Thank you again. WTJ Knowledge Drops on all social media, and you can subscribe on YouTube and Patreon. Thank you so much again. I love you guys.